Good morning, everyone. Happy 4th of July weekend. This weekend we are gathering to celebrate freedom. There's a lot of flags around town waving in the nice breeze we have. Tonight, the fireworks are going to be lighting up the sky. And of course, so many families are joining together and, hot dogs and hamburgers are on the grill. But most important of all, we're gathering to commemorate the birth of a nation that was founded upon the conviction that human beings are created with certain unalienable rights. So, Independence Day reminds us of political freedom. It reminds us of the courage of those who, excuse me, believe that liberty was worth sacrifice. It reminds us that freedom is not merely given, that it must be understood, protected, and lived. And yet, for those of us who walk spiritual path, Independence Day actually offers an opportunity to ask a much deeper question. What does it mean to be truly free? A nation can be free, but individuals may still live in bondage, fear, anxiety, resentment, limitation, sickness, lack, or even false beliefs about themselves. Political freedom is very precious, but spiritual freedom is transformative. More than a century ago, Emily Cady addressed this deeper dimension of freedom in her book, Lessons in Truth, which we have been talking about for the last 6 months. So the first 6 chapters, bondage or liberty, statement of being, thinking, denials, affirmations, and faith, are actually a spiritual roadmap toward genuine liberation. So today, or this weekend, as we celebrate America's independence, we're going to take a look back at those first 6 chapters of Lessons in Truth and explore what it means to declare our spiritual independence. So, the first lesson in Katie's book asks a very profound question: bondage or liberty? Which? Because every person lives under one of 2 conditions. We're either governed by fear or by faith, by appearances or by truth, by limitation or by possibility. Now, many people carry invisible chains. Some are bound by past mistakes. Some are imprisoned, in a sense, by worry. And others are trapped in habits of criticism, self-condemnation, despair. Now, the Israelites experienced this reality, and although they physically left Egypt, Egypt remained in their consciousness for years. Their bodies were free, but their minds were still captive. And that same thing happens today. A person may live in a free country and still believe, I am not enough. Nothing ever works out for me. I will never change. My circumstances lock me in. And these are the thoughts that become mental prisons. So the 4th of July celebrates a declaration of independence against external tyranny. And this book that we've been studying, and like many like it, help us to celebrate a declaration of independence from internal tyranny. Now, the question remains, will we live in bondage or liberty? And the answer begins with recognizing that freedom is our spiritual birthright. So When the founders signed the Declaration of Independence, they made a bold statement about human dignity and freedom. And in Katie's second lesson, Statement of Being, is a declaration of spiritual identity, of spiritual independence. And it states that there is one presence and one power in the universe and in my life, God the good, omnipotent. We say that every Sunday, yet it is actually a very revolutionary statement. Most people begin with appearances. They look at circumstances and they draw conclusions. But spiritual understanding begins with God. If God is omnipresent, then we are never abandoned. If God is omnipotent, then there's no problem greater than divine power. If God is love, then our deepest identity must be rooted in love. The founders of our nation declared that people possess inherent worth because they are endowed by their Creator. And Katie takes us even deeper. She teaches that our true nature is spiritual. We are not merely struggling human beings hoping to find God. We are expressions of God's life, seeking to awaken to what has always been true. And when we understand this, we stop declaring ourselves as being defined by age or occupation, success, failure, health, status, whatever. Instead, we begin to define ourselves by our relationship to God, and this is spiritual independence. No circumstance, no matter what it is, can ever take away what God has already established within us. And the third lesson in Lessons in Truth is simply titled Thinking, because the battle for freedom takes place in thought. Now, our forefathers set up a battle for freedom in the fields. Ours is an inner battle, if you want to look at it that way. You know, this may seem like an ordinary subject, but it's actually one of the most important truths in spiritual living. Every revelation begins with an idea. Before there was an independent nation, there was a new way of thinking about liberty. Before there was transformation in our lives, there must be transformation in consciousness. Scripture tells us that as a man thinks in his heart, so is he, because our thoughts shape our experience. If we consistently think fear, we experience fear. If we consistently think limitation, we experience limitation. If we consistently think that we are separate from God, we experience a spiritual loneliness. Now, Jesus repeatedly emphasized the importance of consciousness. In Matthew 9:29, he said, according to your faith, be it unto you. And he spoke about believing. He spoke of seeing. He spoke of knowing the truth. Why? Because spiritual growth involves the renewal of the mind. Now, many of us spend more time monitoring the news than monitoring our thoughts. There are so many who have put locks and alarms on their doors, and yet we leave the doorway of consciousness completely unguarded. Freedom begins in consciousness. So I'm asking you that on this Independence Day weekend, perhaps the greatest act of patriotism toward our own souls is to refuse thoughts that diminish the life that God has given us. Now, the fourth lesson is denials, which is just rejecting what doesn't belong. And this word can really be understood. Katie does not mean denying the reality that is around us or pretending that challenges don't exist. Rather, she teaches that we deny the authority of anything that contradicts God's truth. The founders of our country denied the legitimacy of oppression. Civil rights leaders denied the legitimacy of injustice. Likewise, spiritual seekers like you and I deny the legitimacy of fear, lack, hatred, limitation, or anything like that as ultimate powers. Every day we face voices that tell us we are weak, we are helpless, we are victims, we are separated from God. And spiritual denial says, no, that is not the final truth. We may start to feel fear like it's knocking at a door trying to get in, but we don't have to let it inside of us into this house. Discouragement may come up, but we don't have to let it in. And negativity may appear, but it does not have to define reality. And Jesus practiced this repeatedly. He denied the final authority of sickness. He denied the final authority of sin. He denied the final authority of death itself. The 4th of July celebrates people who refuse to accept bondage as inevitable. The spiritual life calls us to refuse every belief that keeps us from experiencing God's freedom. Now, some of us need to make a declaration today, like, I deny that fear has power over my future. I deny that resentment has power over my heart. I deny that past failures have power over my identity and my destiny. I deny that appearances have more authority than God. And this is not denial of the reality you live in. That is alignment with a greater reality. And after denials come the 5th lesson, which is affirmation, claiming what is true. Freedom is not merely saying no. Freedom also is saying yes. The Declaration of Independence did not simply reject tyranny, it affirmed liberty. Likewise, spiritual growth requires us not only to reject false beliefs, but also to embrace divine truth. Because an affirmation is not wishful thinking. It's the conscious acknowledgement of spiritual truth. The Apostle Paul practiced affirmations when he declared in Philippians chapter 4, verse 13, I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. In the 23rd Psalm, David practiced affirmations when he declared, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And Jesus, of course, practiced affirmations when he said, the Father that dwells in me, he does the works. Because affirmations shifts our attention from what is wrong to what is essentially true. When fear of any sort says you cannot, an affirmation says, God within me can. When lack says, there's not enough, an affirmation says, God is my source. And when loneliness creeps in and says you're alone, an affirmation says, God is always present. Words matter, thoughts matter. The declarations we repeat shape the consciousness that we develop. So just imagine beginning each day with affirmations like, God's wisdom guides me today. I am surrounded in divine love no matter where I go. Infinite good flows through my life. I am a child of God. Peace fills my heart. Strength fills my mind. Joy fills my spirit. These are not empty slogans. They are a reminder of spiritual reality. These are not empty slogans. They are reminders of spiritual reality. The sixth lesson is faith, and that is the power that makes freedom visible. Because faith is the bridge between spiritual truth and our daily experience. Every great movement toward freedom requires faith. The founders of this country had faith that liberty was possible. Abolitionists had faith that slavery could end. Civil rights leaders had faith that justice could prevail. Faith sees beyond present appearances. Hebrews 11:11 tells us, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Because faith is not passive. Faith is active trust in divine reality. Faith allows us to move forward before all the evidence is visible. When Peter stepped out of the boat, faith moved his feet. When Moses approached the Red Sea, faith was moving him. When Jesus spoke to storms and sickness and scarcity, faith is what spoke through him. Faith does not ignore difficulties. Faith sees beyond them. Many people wait for certainty before believing, but faith believes before certainty arrives. Because faith declares that God is working in even when we cannot see it. God is always present even when we can't feel it. God is guiding even when we don't understand the path. Faith transforms freedom from a theory into an experience. So as we celebrate Independence Day this weekend, we give thanks for the freedoms we enjoy. We honor those who sacrificed for the liberty that we share. And we recognize the blessings of living in a nation where freedom remains a cherished ideal. Yet today we also remember the highest freedom is spiritual. Political freedom can create opportunities for us. Spiritual freedom creates transformation. Political freedom allows us to pursue happiness in our own way. And spiritual freedom reveals joy in a way that nothing else can. Political freedom removes external change, but spiritual freedom removes our internal change. Then just remember the work of freedom is never finished. Nations must continually renew their commitment to liberty. And each and every one as individuals must continually renew our commitment to spiritual truth. Every day we are invited to choose liberty over bondage. Every day we are invited to remember who we truly are. Every day we are invited to think thoughts aligned with God. Every day we are invited to deny fear and to affirm truth. And every day we are invited to walk by faith. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." And notice in that statement that he did not say truth would merely comfort us. He said truth would free us. And that freedom is the central message running through the first 6 chapters of Emily Cady's work. Freedom begins when we recognize our bondage. Freedom grows when we remember our divine identity. And freedom expands, we discipline our thinking. But it deepens when we deny the authority of fear. It strengthens as we affirm God's truth, and freedom becomes visible when we walk by faith. So on this 4th of July weekend, may we celebrate not only the birth of a nation, but also the awakening of the soul. So today, we declare independence from fear, from resentment, from limitation. Independence from every belief that denies the presence and power of God. And may we stand firmly in the spiritual liberty that Christ revealed, knowing that the true freedom is not merely a political idea, but a divine reality. For where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And so it is. So thank you for joining us today as we celebrate this beautiful 4th of July weekend. God bless each and every one of you. May you have a very, very blessed day and a beautiful, beautiful, spiritually liberated life. God bless.